halls of the royal palace, where the air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of incense from the nearby chapel. On July 8, 1545, a prince was born amid the grandeur of Spain's emerging empire, the first child of Philip II and Maria Manuela of Portugal, a well-known historical fact that marked the arrival of Don Carlos, heir to one of the world's most powerful thrones. The palace, with its intricate tapestries depicting victorious battles and divine blessings, buzzed with courtiers and midwives, their whispers a blend of joy and hushed concern. The birth was meant to be a beacon of hope, securing the Habsburg lineage, yet hidden omens lurked in the shadows, foretelling a tragedy that would scar the royal family. Maria Manuela, the young princess whose marriage to Philip had sealed alliances between Spain and Portugal, labored through the night, her cries echoing off the stone walls. The midwives, clad in simple linen aprons, worked tirelessly, their hands steady but their faces etched with worry. An obscure detail, rarely spoken of in the annals, was the unusual pallor that marked the infant from the moment he emerged, a subtle deformity in his spine noticed only by the attending physician, who dared not voice it aloud for fear of the king's wrath. This imperfection, a twist of fate in his fragile form, seemed an ill omen, as if the gods themselves had inscribed a warning on his body. Philip, the stern prince soon to be king, paced the antechamber, his mind a whirlwind of ambition and duty. This child will rule an empire, he thought, but what if he is not strong enough? The courtiers gathered outside, their velvet cloaks shimmering in crimson and ochre, murmuring prayers to the Virgin Mary for a healthy heir. The palace gardens below bloomed with summer roses, their petals a stark contrast to the tension within. Maria Manuela, exhausted and pale, held her son briefly, her eyes filled with a mother's love mingled with sorrow. He is perfect, she thought, yet a shiver ran through her as she felt his tiny frame tremble. Tragically, the birth took its toll. Maria would not survive the complications, her life slipping away in the days that followed, leaving Philip a widower and the infant motherless. The palace fell into a somber hush, the joy of birth tainted by loss, as wet nurses and aunts stepped in to care for the prince. The stars above Valladolid twinkled coldly, indifferent to the human drama below. Don Carlos's arrival was celebrated with feasts and fireworks, but the omens lingered like a fog, the deformed spine, the mother's death, the whispers of fragility. Philip gazed at his son, his heart a battleground of pride and doubt. Will he be the king I envision, he wondered, his thoughts already turning to the burdens of rule. The palace, a symbol of power, now held a seed of tragedy, its halls echoing with the cries of a prince whose fate seemed cursed from the start. Did the omens truly foretell his tragic end, or was history the crueler judge, twisting innocence into despair? The shadows lengthened, and Valladolid slept uneasily, unaware of the storm that would engulf the royal heir. A world of gilded expectations and hidden cruelties. By the 1550s, as Philip II ascended to the throne in 1556, a well-known historical fact that solidified Spain's dominance in Europe, the prince's childhood was marked by the weight of his father's unyielding gaze. The Escorial, that monumental palace monastery rising from the rugged Sierra de Guadarrama, became the backdrop for Carlos's early years, its austere stone walls reflecting the king's pious severity. The air was often filled with the chant of monks and the scent of beeswax candles, but beneath the sanctity lurked a tension that gnawed at the young heir's spirit. Carlos, with his slight frame and uneven gait from the spinal affliction noted at birth, roamed the corridors under the watchful eyes of tutors and courtiers. His days were regimented, lessons in Latin, theology, and statecraft, interspersed with awkward attempts at swordplay that highlighted his physical frailty. An obscure detail, seldom recorded, was the prince's secret collection of deformed insects, beetles with twisted wings and spiders with missing legs, kept in a hidden box under his bed, a childish fascination that mirrored his own imperfections and stirred unease among the servants who discovered it. "Why must I be broken when father is so strong?" Carlos thought, his small hands trembling as he examined a crippled moth, his mind a whirl of resentment and longing for approval. Philip II, the epitome of Habsburg stoicism, observed his son with a mixture of duty and disappointment. The king, often cloaked in black velvet, spent hours in prayer or poring over dispatches from distant colonies, his thoughts burdened by the empire's vastness. He must be molded into a ruler, Philip mused, yet each report of Carlos's tantrums or clumsiness deepened the rift. The court whispered of the prince's fragility, tales of his fainting spells during hunts, or his outbursts in the classroom spreading like wildfire. Maria Manuela's death haunted the palace, her portrait gazing down with melancholic eyes, a reminder of the bloodline's vulnerabilities. Carlos's aunts and stepmothers tried to nurture him, but their affection could not bridge the chasm between father and son. The gardens of the Escorial bloomed with imported flowers from the New World, their vibrant crimson and ochre petals a stark contrast to the prince's pallor. During rare moments of play, Carlos would chase butterflies, his laughter echoing briefly before dissolving into coughs. The courtiers, in their embroidered doublets, exchanged glances, their loyalty to the king tempered by pity for the boy. Will he ever stand tall? They wondered, their whispers fueling the growing shadows around the air. Philip's stern gaze, sharp as an inquisitor's blade, pressed upon Carlos, shaping a childhood where love was conditional and weakness unforgivable. The stars over the Sierra glittered like distant jewels, indifferent to the human frailties below. As Carlos grew, the whispers of his fragility stirred, planting seeds of doubt that would bloom into tragedy. The court, a labyrinth of intrigue, watched as the prince struggled under his father's shadow, his spirit bending but not yet breaking. Did Philip's sternness forge a king or fracture a soul, or was history the crueler judge in this royal dance of power and pity? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial stood silent, its walls holding the secrets of a childhood eclipsed. Halls. In 1560, Don Carlos, barely 15, was officially named heir to the Spanish throne, a well-known historical fact that placed the vast empire of Philip II upon his frail shoulders. The court, gathered in a grand ceremony under vaulted ceilings adorned with crimson tapestries, watched as the young prince stood beside his father, his uneven posture a stark contrast to Philip's regal bearing. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and incense, but beneath the pomp lurked a tension that clung to the prince like a shadow, his destiny a burden heavier than the crown he was meant to wear. Carlos, his pale face framed by dark curls, felt the eyes of the court upon him, their gazes a mix of pity and calculation. His spinal affliction, noted at his birth in Valladolid, made every step a trial, yet the expectations of kingship demanded perfection. During lessons in the Escorial's library, surrounded by leather-bound tomes and flickering candles, he struggled to meet his tutor's demands. An obscure detail whispered among the servants was his habit of hurling quills, books, even candlesticks in fits of rage when his mind faltered or his body failed him, objects crashing against stone walls with a force that startled the court. "Why must I be what I cannot?" he thought, his heart a storm of frustration and shame, his outbursts a cry for a freedom he could never grasp. Philip II, cloaked in black velvet, observed his son from a distance, his face a mask of royal composure hiding a growing unease. "He is my heir, but can he rule?" the king wondered, his thoughts drifting to the empire's sprawling domains, from the Americas to the Netherlands. The courtiers, their ochre doublets gleaming in the torchlight, whispered of Carlos's temper, their loyalty to Philip warring with their fear of the prince's unpredictability. The memory of Maria Manuela's death, her portrait still gazing mournfully from the palace walls, haunted the king, a reminder that his son carried her fragility.
Elizabeth de Valois, Philip's young French queen, tried to soothe Carlos, her gentle words a fleeting balm, but even her kindness could not mend the rift between father and son. The gardens outside the Escorial bloomed with roses, their crimson petals a vivid contrast to the prince's pallor as he wandered, seeking solace in solitude. The monks' chants drifted from the monastery, a solemn counterpoint to the court's murmurs. Carlos's tutors reported his struggles, his mind sharp but erratic, his body betraying him at every turn. The weight of the throne, with its promise of power and its demand for strength, pressed upon him, each expectation a stone in a growing pile. "Am I cursed to fail?" he thought, his gaze fixed on the distant Sierra, where the stars began to emerge, cold and unyielding. The court, a labyrinth of intrigue, watched as the air buckled under his burden, their whispers a prelude to a darker fate. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, as if hesitant to illuminate the tragedy unfolding below. The ceremony of 1560 had crowned Carlos heir, but it had also chained him to a destiny he could not bear. The Escorial, once a symbol of imperial might, now held a prince whose spirit was fracturing under the weight of expectation. Did the throne's demands shape his downfall? Or was history the crueler judge, forging a path where frailty could find no mercy? The shadows deepened, and the palace stood silent, its walls guarding the secrets of a boy born to rule, but destined to break.
The Escorial's shadowed halls, bathed in the flicker of torchlight, seemed to pulse with whispers that grew sharper passing year. By the mid-1560s, Don Carlos's erratic behavior, a well-known historical fact recorded by courtiers and ambassadors, had become a storm cloud over the Spanish court, casting doubt on his fitness to inherit Philip II's vast empire. The prince, now a young man, wandered the palace's austere corridors, his uneven gait from the spinal affliction noted at his birth in Valladolid, a constant reminder of his frailty. The air carried the scent of wax and old parchment, but beneath the sanctity of the Escorial's monastery palace, a creeping dread took root, as rumors of madness swirled like dust motes in the dim light. Carlos's chambers, adorned with crimson tapestries and a single window overlooking the Sierra, were both sanctuary and prison. An obscure detail, rarely whispered beyond the servants' quarters, was his obsession with a caged finch, its feathers a vivid emerald, which he believed spoke to him in cryptic riddles about his destiny. "You understand me," he thought, his pale fingers clutching the cage as the bird chirped, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity that unnerved his attendants. His outbursts, books hurled in fits of rage as seen in his youth, had grown more frequent, his words sometimes incoherent, laced with defiance or despair. Courtiers in ochre doublets exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to Philip warring with fear of the prince's unpredictable moods. Is he touched by madness, or merely trapped by expectation? They wondered, their whispers spreading like a contagion through the court. Philip II, cloaked in black velvet, watched his son with a gaze as cold as the stone walls. The king, consumed by the demands of empire, wars in the Netherlands, tensions with England, felt the weight of a flawed heir. Can he lead when his mind falters? Philip thought, his heart a battleground of duty and disappointment. Elizabeth de Valois, the queen, tried to soothe Carlos, her gentle voice a fleeting comfort, but even she could not quell his storms. The memory of Maria Manuela's death, her portrait a silent sentinel in the Escorial, haunted Philip, as if her fragility lived on in their son. The court's whispers grew bolder, tales of Carlos's rants and strange fancies reaching even foreign ambassadors, who scribbled reports of a prince unfit to rule. The gardens outside bloomed with roses, their petals a stark contrast to the prince's pallor as he sat alone, staring at his caged finch. The monks' chants drifted from the monastery, a solemn backdrop to the court's unease. Carlos's tutors, once hopeful, now despaired, their lessons interrupted by his sudden tears or laughter. "Am I cursed, or is this my freedom?" he thought, his mind a labyrinth where reason and chaos collided.
The Escorial, a monument to Philip's power, became a stage for a prince whose spirit was unraveling, each rumor of madness a thread pulling at the seams of his destiny. The stars above the Sierra glimmered faintly, their light too weak to pierce the growing darkness within the palace. The whispers of Carlos's instability, fueled by his bird and his outbursts, painted him as a threat to the throne he was born to inherit. The court, a web of intrigue, watched as the prince teetered on the edge, his mind a battleground where hope fought despair. Did madness truly claim Don Carlos, or was history the crueler judge, twisting his struggles into a narrative of failure? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial stood silent, its walls guarding the secrets of a prince whose fate was slipping beyond his grasp. In the heart of the Escorial, where torchlight cast flickering shadows on stone walls, Philip II sat alone in his private chamber, the weight of an empire pressing upon his shoulders. In the 1560s, the king's consolidation of power, a well-known historical fact that saw Spain's vast domains unified under his iron will, demanded a vigilance that left no room for weakness, least of all in his heir. The room, austere, yet adorned with crimson tapestries and a single crucifix, was a sanctuary for the king's thoughts, but tonight it was a crucible for doubt. The air carried the faint scent of ink and wax, mingling with the distant chant of monks, as Philip grappled with the growing rift between himself and Don Carlos, whose erratic behavior had become a specter haunting the court. Philip, his black velvet doublet stark against his pale complexion, pored over dispatches by candlelight, but his mind was elsewhere. An obscure detail, hidden from all but his closest confidants, was the king's private journal, its pages filled with anguished entries about Carlos's instability, fears that the prince's fits, like the hurled candlesticks of his youth or his obsession with a caged finch, signaled a mind unfit for the throne. "Is he my son or my enemy?" Philip thought, his quill hesitating over the parchment, his heart torn between paternal duty and royal necessity. The whispers from Valladolid, where Carlos was born frail, and the court's tales of his rants echoed in the king's mind, each outburst a crack in the foundation of his dynasty. The Escorial, a monument to his power, now felt like a prison for his doubts. Beyond the chamber's heavy oak door, the court buzzed with unease. Elizabeth de Valois, the queen, had spoken of Carlos's kindness, her gentle words a plea for patience, but Philip saw only risk. The memory of Maria Manuela's death, her portrait a silent witness in the palace, weighed on him as if her fragility cursed their son. Courtiers in ochre doublets, their loyalty wavering, whispered of the prince's strange fancies, his belief that his finch spoke of destiny, his sudden tears during council meetings. "Can he be trusted with Spain's future?" they murmured, their eyes darting to the king's closed door. Philip, ever the strategist, knew the empire demanded a steady hand, not a prince whose mind seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos. The gardens outside bloomed with roses, their crimson petals a fleeting beauty against the Sierra's stark peaks. Philip gazed through the window, his thoughts as cold as the stars above. The empire's wars, from the Netherlands to the Mediterranean, required a ruler of iron resolve, and Carlos's frailty, both of body and mind, cast a long shadow. "Have I failed him as a father, or does he fail me as a son?" he wondered, his heart a battleground of love and suspicion. The Escorial's walls, built to glorify God and King, now seemed to close in, each stone a reminder of the legacy at
stake. The whispers of Carlos's madness, born in the halls of this very palace, were no longer mere rumors, but a threat to the crown itself. The stars over the Escorial glimmered with a distant chill, as if bearing witness to a king's torment. Philip's doubts, scrawled in his journal, were a private confession, yet they foreshadowed a public reckoning. The court, a web of loyalty and intrigue, watched as the king weighed his son's worth, his judgment a blade poised to strike. Did Philip's doubts protect an empire or doom a prince, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a tragedy from a father's fear? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial stood silent, its halls holding the secrets of a dynasty on the brink. The Escorial's halls, austere and solemn, seemed to hold their breath as the spring of 1559 bloomed with the promise of a royal alliance. The proposed betrothal of Don Carlos to Elizabeth de Valois, the young French princess, before her eventual marriage to Philip II, a well-known historical fact that sealed peace between Spain and France, cast a fleeting light on the Spanish court, only to deepen the shadows within the royal family. The palace, its stone walls adorned with crimson tapestries and gilded crosses, buzzed with anticipation, but beneath the surface, cracks in the Habsburg unity widened, threatening to shatter the fragile bond between father and son. The air was heavy with the scent of roses from the gardens and the wax of candles lit for diplomacy, yet a sense of betrayal lingered, as delicate as the petals and as sharp as a blade. Carlos, now a young man, his frail frame marked by the spinal affliction noted at his birth in Valladolid, stood in his chamber, clutching a letter he had penned in secret. An obscure detail, hidden from all but a trusted servant, was his series of desperate missives to Elizabeth, scrawled in trembling ink, confessing a love that bordered on obsession. She could save me, he thought, his eyes fixed on the caged finch that chirped cryptic riddles, his heart a storm of hope and despair. The letters, never sent, spoke of a prince who saw in Elizabeth a chance for redemption, a way to escape the weight of his father's doubts and the court's whispers of madness. But the betrothal was a mirage. Philip, ever the strategist, claimed Elizabeth for himself, a decision that crushed Carlos's fragile dreams and fueled his growing resentment. Philip II, cloaked in black velvet, stood in his private chamber, his journal open to a new page of doubts about his son's stability. Can a prince who loves so recklessly rule? He wondered, his thoughts darkened by reports of Carlos's outbursts, books and candlesticks hurled in rage, as seen in his youth, and now these whispered letters. The court, its courtiers in ochre doublets, murmured of the prince's infatuation, their loyalty to the king tinged with pity for the heir whose heart was breaking. Elizabeth, radiant in her French silks, entered the Escorial as Philip's bride, her gentle smile a balm to the court, but a wound to Carlos. Why must father take everything, he thought, his mind a labyrinth where love and betrayal intertwined, his finch's chirps a mocking echo of his lost hopes. The gardens outside bloomed with roses, their crimson petals falling like tears under the Sierra's stark peaks. Elizabeth, unaware of Carlos's letters, walked among them, her presence a reminder of the unity that was meant to be. The monks' chants drifted from the monastery, a solemn counterpoint to the court's intrigue. The betrothal's collapse had exposed the royal family's fragility, each member caught in a web of duty and desire. Have I pushed him too far? Philip wondered, his heart heavy with the memory of Maria Manuela's death, her portrait a silent witness to their fractured lineage. The Escorial, built to glorify God and empire, now held a prince whose dreams were crumbling, his love a trap that deepened his isolation. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light a distant promise in a world of broken vows. The failed betrothal had not only denied Carlos love but had widened the chasm between him and his father, setting the stage for a darker tragedy. The court watched, its whispers a prelude to a storm that would engulf the air. Did love doom Don Carlos, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a trap from a prince's fragile heart? The shadows deepened, and the palace stood silent, its walls guarding the secrets of a family torn apart. The Escorial's stone walls, cold and unyielding, seemed to close in as whispers of rebellion stirred in the autumn of 1567. Don Carlos, his mind fractured by years of doubt and denial, began to plot against his father, a well-known historical fact that culminated in whispers of treason reaching Philip II's ears. The palace, with its vast halls and monastic silence, became a breeding ground for the prince's desperate schemes, his secret meetings with disaffected nobles, a spark that threatened to ignite the powder keg of the Spanish court.
The air was thick with the scent of burning logs from the hearths and the faint echo of monks' chants. But beneath the piety lurked a tension that clawed at the royal family's core. Carlos, pacing his chamber under the watchful gaze of his caged Finch, felt the weight of his failed betrothal to Elizabeth de Valois crush him anew. An obscure detail, confided only to a loyal servant, was the prince's hidden cache of maps and letters, sketched in trembling hand, outlining a flight to the Netherlands, where he dreamed of rallying forces against Philip's rule. "Father has stolen my life. Now I take back my destiny," he thought, his eyes burning with a feverish resolve, his frail body trembling with the audacity of his plans. The letters, never sent but discovered in fragments, spoke of a prince driven to desperation, his love for Elizabeth twisted into a catalyst for rebellion. The court, its courtiers in ochre doublets, caught wind of his mutterings, alliances with Flemish rebels, dreams of overthrowing the king who had caged him like his Finch. Philip II, in his private chamber, pored over reports by candlelight, his journal now filled with entries of not just doubt but dread. "Is my son a traitor, or has my sternness driven him to this?" he wondered, his heart a storm of betrayal and sorrow. The memory of Maria Manuela's death a ghost that haunted his decisions. The whispers from Valladolid, where Carlos was born frail, and the court's tales of his rants had evolved into accusations of conspiracy. Elizabeth de Valois, the queen, pleaded for mercy in hushed tones, her gentle words a reminder of the love Carlos had once harbored. "He is lost, but not beyond saving," she thought, her presence a fragile bridge between father and son. The Escorial, built as a bastion of faith, now sheltered a prince whose rebellion was a cry against the throne's unyielding grip. The gardens outside wilted under the autumn chill, their crimson roses fading like the prince's hopes. Nobles, drawn into Carlos's orbit by pity or ambition, met in shadowed alcoves, their voices low, their loyalties divided. "Will he rise or fall?" they murmured, their eyes darting to the king's windows. Carlos's plots, born in the labyrinth of his mind, were clumsy yet dangerous, each whispered alliance a thread in a web that entangled the royal family. The monks' chants rose like a lament, a solemn backdrop to the brewing storm. Philip, ever vigilant, sensed the threat, his empire's stability hanging by the frayed bonds of kinship. The stars above the Escorial glimmered coldly, as if foretelling the darkness to come. Carlos's rebellion, sparked by a heart broken by his father's choices, exposed the raw wounds of a dynasty where love and power clashed. The court watched, its whispers a prelude to arrest and tragedy. Did Carlos's plots seal his fate, or was history the crueler judge, turning a prince's desperation into treason? The shadows deepened, and the palace stood silent, its walls bearing witness to a spark that would consume the air. The Escorial's halls, cloaked in the chill of January 1568, seemed to shudder as the king's will cast a shadow over the palace. On the night of January 18th, Philip II ordered the arrest of his son, Don Carlos, a well-known historical fact that marked a turning point in the tragic saga of Spain's heir, sealing his fate in a web of paternal betrayal. The palace, its stone walls lined with crimson tapestries and flickering torches, was a labyrinth of silence and dread. The monks' chants, a distant lament as guards moved through the corridors to execute the king's decree. The air was thick with the scent of wax and winter frost, but beneath the sanctity of the Escorial, a father's heart wrestled with the unthinkable act of condemning his own son. Carlos, asleep in his chamber, was unaware of the approaching storm. His frail frame curled beneath a threadbare blanket. The caged Finch he believed spoke to him silent in the darkness. An obscure detail, whispered only among the guards, was the king's order to strip the prince's room of personal possessions before his arrest. His maps, his letters, even the cherished Finch, its emerald feathers a fleeting comfort, removed to break his spirit further. "Why does father forsake me?" Carlos thought in his half-waking moments, his mind a fog of betrayal and fear as the guards' boots echoed closer. The The door burst open, and torchlight flooded the room, revealing stern faces and drawn swords. The prince's eyes widened, his heart a drumbeat of panic, as he was seized and led away, his uneven gait a stark reminder of the frailty noted at his birth in Valladolid. Philip II, in his private chamber, stood motionless, his black velvet doublet absorbing the candlelight, his journal now a chronicle of necessity rather than doubt. I protect the empire, but at what cost? He thought, his heart heavy with the memory of Maria Manuela's death, her portrait a silent witness to the son he could not save. The whispers of Carlos's rebellion, his maps and letters plotting flight to the Netherlands, had forced the king's hand, his love for his son buried beneath the weight of duty. Elizabeth de Valois, the queen, wept in her chambers, her gentle pleas for mercy unanswered. He is but a boy, lost in his pain, she thought, her heart aching for the prince she had once hoped to save. The court, its courtiers in ochre doublets, stood frozen, their loyalty to Philip tinged with horror at the arrest of the heir. The gardens outside lay dormant under a blanket of frost, their crimson roses long withered, a mirror to the royal family's fractured bonds. The monks' chants grew faint, drowned by the clatter of chains as Carlos was led to a sealed chamber. The Escorial, built to glorify God and King, now felt like a tomb, its walls closing in on a prince whose dreams of rebellion had crumbled. Have I driven him to this, or was he always lost? Philip wondered, his resolve as cold as the Sierra's peaks. The court, a web of fear and intrigue, watched as the king's decree reshaped the future, each step toward Carlos's confinement a nail in the dynasty's coffin. The stars above the Escorial glittered with icy indifference, their light too weak to pierce the darkness of a father's betrayal. Carlos's arrest, born of his plots and Philip's fears, marked the point of no return, a moment where love succumbed to power. The palace stood silent, its halls echoing with the weight of a decree that would haunt Spain's legacy. Did Philip betray his son to save an empire, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a tragedy from a father's fear? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial became a prison for both king and prince. The Escorial's darkened chambers, shrouded in the gloom of winter 1568, held Don Carlos like a prisoner in a tomb of stone. Following his arrest in January, the prince's confinement in a sealed room within the palace, a well-known historical fact that shocked Europe's courts, marked the deepening of his torment, as isolation gnawed at his already fragile spirit. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and extinguished candles, the silence broken only by the distant chants of monks, their voices a faint echo in the vast monastery palace. The walls, once a symbol of imperial might, now seemed to close in, their crimson tapestries faded, their gilded crosses offering no solace to a prince stripped of freedom and hope. Carlos, his frail frame weakened further by his spinal affliction from birth in Valladolid, sat on a straw pallet, his eyes fixed on the barred window where slivers of gray light crept through. An obscure detail, whispered among the guards, was his refusal to touch the trays of bread and meat brought to his cell, convinced the food was laced with poison by his father's orders. They want me dead, he thought, his mind a labyrinth of paranoia, his hands trembling as he pushed the tray away. The memory of his caged finch, taken during his arrest, a wound that festered in his heart. The isolation was a crueler torment than chains, each day blurring into the next, his thoughts spiraling between defiance and despair. Why does father leave me to rot? He wondered, his voice a whisper in the dark, unanswered by the stone walls. Outside, the court moved on, its rhythm disrupted by the absence of the heir. Philip II, in his private chamber, penned journal entries that spoke of necessity, yet his heart ached with a father's guilt. Have I saved the empire or damn my son? He thought, his black velvet doublet a shroud for his conflicted soul, the memory of Maria Manuela's death a constant shadow. Elizabeth de Valois, the queen, stood at her window, gazing at the Sierra's snow-dusted peaks, her heart heavy with sorrow for the prince she had once tried to save. He is alone, and I am powerless, she thought, her gentle presence a fleeting light in the palace's gloom. The courtiers, their ochre doublets muted in the winter light, whispered of Carlos's confinement, their loyalty to Philip tinged with unease at the prince's plight. The gardens outside lay barren, their crimson roses buried under frost, a mirror to the prince's fading spirit. The monks' chants, once a comfort, now sounded like a requiem, their cadence a reminder of the world beyond Carlos's reach. His rebellion, sparked by a broken betrothal and fueled by dreams of the Netherlands, had led to this, a cell where his only companions were fear and silence. Am I mad? Or is this my punishment? He thought, his eyes tracing the cracks in the stone, each one a map of his fractured mind. The Escorial, built to glorify God and King, had become a prison, its walls sealing the fate of a prince whose dreams had turned to dust. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light too weak to reach the darkened chamber where Carlos languished. His isolation, a consequence of Philip's decree, deepened the torment of a soul already broken by expectation and betrayal. The court watched, its whispers a lament for a prince lost to the shadows. Did Carlos's suffering cleanse a dynasty's sins, or was history the crueler judge, forging a prison from a father's fear? The shadows deepened, and the palace stood silent, its walls guarding the secrets of a prince whose light was fading. The Escorial's stone walls, cold and unyielding, seemed to absorb the anguished cries that echoed from Don Carlos's sealed chamber in the spring of 1568. The imprisonment of the Spanish heir, a well-known historical fact that sparked alarm across Europe's courts, particularly in France, where ambassadors protested the treatment of their princess's stepson, cast a pall over the palace, its halls heavy with the weight of a prince's pleas. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and fading incense, the monks' chants a distant murmur, drowned by the desperation of a young man whose world had shrunk to the confines of his cell. The Escorial, once a monument to imperial glory, now stood as a silent witness to a dynasty's unraveling, its crimson tapestries and gilded crosses offering no comfort to a prince begging for mercy. Carlos, his frail body weakened by hunger and the spinal affliction noted at his birth in Valladolid, knelt on the cold floor, his fingers raw from scratching pleas into the stone walls, an obscure detail discovered by a guard who dared not report it. "Father, let me live," he scrawled, his words jagged and uneven, a mirror to his fractured mind, his heart pounding with the fear that his rebellion and his lost love for Elizabeth de Valois had sealed his doom. Will no one hear me, he thought, his voice hoarse from shouting, his refusal to eat, born of paranoia about poisoned food, leaving him gaunt and trembling. The memory of his caged finch, taken during his arrest, haunted him, its absence a symbol of his stolen freedom. The silence of his cell was a torment, each unanswered cry a wound that deepened his despair. Outside, the court grappled with divided loyalties. Philip II, in his private chamber, read letters from France demanding explanations, his black velvet doublet a shroud for his conflicted soul. Have I gone too far? He wondered, his journal now a ledger of a father's guilt, the memory of Maria Manuela's death a ghost that lingered in his decisions. Elizabeth de Valois, her eyes red from weeping, paced her chambers, her heart torn for the prince she had once hoped to guide. He is no traitor, only broken, she thought, her gentle pleas to Philip met with silence, her French heritage a bridge to the protests echoing from Paris. The courtiers, their ochre doublets muted in the spring light, whispered in shadowed alcoves, torn between fear of the king's wrath and pity for the prince whose cries pierced the palace's stillness. The gardens outside bloomed with tentative spring blossoms, their crimson petals a stark contrast to the pallor of a court on edge. The monks' chants rose like a prayer, but they could not drown out the rumors of Carlos's suffering. His scratched pleas, his refusal to eat, his fading strength. Can we save him, or is it too late? The courtiers murmured, their loyalty to Philip tested by the prince's torment. The Escorial, built to glorify God and empire, had become a prison for a dynasty's hopes, its walls echoing with the desperate cries of a prince whose rebellion had led to this isolation. The diplomatic storm from Europe only deepened the shadows, each protest a reminder of the stakes at hand. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light a distant hope in a world of unanswered pleas. Carlos's cries, born of a heart broken by betrayal and confinement, tested the loyalties of a court caught between king and heir. The palace stood silent, its halls heavy with the weight of a tragedy unfolding. Did mercy have a place in an empire's heart, or was history the crueler judge, condemning a prince for his father's fears? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial waited, its walls guarding the secrets of a soul crying out in vain. The Escorial's stone walls, bathed in the oppressive heat of July 1568, seemed to suffocate the last flickers of hope within the palace. Don Carlos, confined for months in a darkened chamber, died under mysterious circumstances on July 24, a well-known historical fact that sent shockwaves through Europe's courts, leaving questions that would haunt history. The air was thick with the scent of stale straw and unwashed linen. The monk's chants, a faint drone that could not pierce the silence of the prince's cell. The Escorial, once a symbol of imperial might, now stood as a tomb, its crimson tapestries faded, its gilded crosses offering no solace to a prince whose body and spirit had been broken by isolation and despair. Carlos, his frail frame ravaged by his refusal to eat, and the spinal affliction noted at his birth in Valladolid, lay on a straw pallet, his eyes sunken and his breath shallow. An obscure detail, whispered by a guard who stood watch, was the prince's habit of murmuring to an imagined figure in his cell, perhaps his mother, Maria Manuela, or his lost love Elizabeth de Valois, his voice soft and feverish, as if seeking comfort from a ghost. "Are you here to save me?" he whispered, his hands tracing the scratched pleas on the stone walls, his mind a fog where reality and delusion blurred. The memory of his caged Finch, taken at his arrest, and his failed rebellion against Philip haunted him, each moment of confinement a weight that crushed his fading spirit. "Is this my end, or my release?" he thought, his heart a flicker of defiance amid the growing dark. Outside, the court held its breath, torn between fear and sorrow. Philip II, in his private chamber, stared at reports from his spies, his black velvet doublet a shroud for a father's guilt. Did I will this, or was it fate? He wondered, his journal silent now, the memory of Maria Manuela's death, a shadow that deepened his remorse. Elizabeth de Valois, her face pale with grief, knelt in the palace chapel, her prayers for Carlos unanswered. He was a boy, not a monster, she thought, her heart breaking for the prince whose love for her had sparked his rebellion. The courtiers, their ochre doublets muted in the summer heat, whispered of poison, starvation, or divine judgment, their loyalties divided between a king they feared and a prince they pitied. The protests from France, sparked by Carlos's imprisonment, now turned to accusations, but no answers came from the Escorial's silent walls. The gardens outside wilted under the relentless sun, their crimson roses scorched, a mirror to the prince's fading life. The monks' chants, once a comfort, sounded like a requiem, their rhythm a solemn backdrop to Carlos's decline. His scratched pleas, his refusal to eat, his whispered conversations with phantoms, all spoke of a soul unraveling, trapped in a body too weak to endure. Have I failed them all? Philip wondered, his gaze fixed on the Sierra's peaks, where the stars began to emerge, cold and distant. The Escorial, built to glorify God and empire, had become a grave, its halls heavy with the mystery of a prince's end. The stars above glittered faintly, their light too weak to illuminate the truth of Carlos's final days. His death, shrouded in whispers of foul play, marked the end of a rebellion and the beginning of a legend. The court stood silent, its murmurs a lament for a prince lost to history's shadows. Did Carlos's decline reveal a broken soul, or was history the crueler judge, veiling the truth in a fog of suspicion? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial waited, its walls guarding the secrets of a life extinguished too soon.
The Escorial's stone walls, heavy with the heat of July 1568, seemed to mourn as the life of Don Carlos flickered out in his darkened cell. The prince's death on July 24th, shrouded in rumors of poisoning or murder, a well-known historical fact that fueled controversy across Europe, cast a veil of suspicion over the Spanish court, leaving accusations and regret to echo through the palace. The air was thick with the scent of stale straw and extinguished hope. The monks' chants, a distant requiem that could not pierce the silence of the chamber where the air lay still. The Escorial, once a beacon of imperial might, now stood as a sepulchre, its crimson tapestries faded, its gilded crosses offering no absolution for a dynasty's loss. Carlos, his frail body ravaged by starvation and the spinal affliction noted at his birth in Valladolid, lay motionless, his sunken eyes closed as if in surrender. An obscure detail, whispered by a guard who stood vigil, was the single candle left burning in his cell, its flame a ritual gesture ordered by a remorseful Philip, casting a trembling ochre light on the prince's scratched pleas etched into the stone. "Is this my end, mother?" Carlos had whispered in his final hours, his imagined conversations with Maria Manuela fading as his breath grew weak, the memory of his caged finch and his lost love for Elizabeth de Valois a lingering ache. His rebellion, his cries for mercy, his refusal to eat, all had led to this moment, where life slipped away in a haze of mystery and pain. Am I free at last? His fading mind wondered, the silence of death his only answer. Outside the court was a cauldron of whispers and regret. Philip II, in his private chamber, stared at his journal, its pages now blank, his black velvet doublet a shroud for a father's sorrow. Did I kill my son to save my empire, he thought, the weight of Maria Manuela's death and his own decree crushing his soul. Elizabeth de Valois, her face streaked with tears, knelt in the chapel, her prayers a lament for the prince she could not save. He deserved mercy. Not this, she thought, her heart broken by the accusations of poison that swirled from France to Vienna. The courtiers, their ochre doublets dim in the summer light, murmured of foul play, their loyalty to Philip shaken by the specter of a king who might slay his own heir. The protests from foreign courts grew louder, each letter a thorn in the king's conscience. The gardens outside withered under the relentless sun, their crimson roses scorched, a mirror to the dynasty's tarnished glory. The monks' chants, once a comfort, now sounded like a dirge, their rhythm a backdrop to the court's uneasy silence. Carlos's death, whether by starvation, illness, or darker means, left a wound that no crown could heal. Have we betrayed our prince, or was he doomed from the start? The courtiers whispered, their eyes avoiding the sealed chamber where the candle still burned. The Escorial, built to glorify God and King, had become a monument to regret, its walls holding the secrets of a death too shrouded to unravel. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light a distant witness to a tragedy sealed in suspicion. Carlos's death, marked by that solitary candle, left accusations of murder to haunt Philip's reign, a legacy of doubt that would outlive the prince. The court stood silent, its murmurs a requiem for a soul lost to history's shadows. Did justice claim Don Carlos, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a tale of suspicion from a father's fateful choice? The shadows deepened, and the palace waited, its walls guarding the mystery of a prince's end. The Escorial's vast halls, cloaked in the somber light of autumn 1568, seemed to hold their breath as the Spanish court grappled with the void left by Don Carlos's death. Philip II's continued rule, unshaken despite the scandal of his son's mysterious demise, a well-known historical fact that solidified his grip on Spain's empire, cast a heavy silence over the palace, where grief and fear mingled like shadows on the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and fading roses, the monks' chants a mournful undercurrent that could not soothe the court's unease.
The Escorial, once a beacon of imperial glory, now felt haunted, its crimson tapestries and gilded crosses dimmed by the ghost of a disgraced heir whose name was spoken only in whispers. In the wake of Carlos's death, the court moved with a cautious tread, as if the prince's spirit lingered in the corridors. An obscure detail, known only to a few servants, was the king's quiet order to remove Carlos's portraits from the palace walls. Their vibrant oils, depicting the frail prince born in Valladolid, replaced with blank spaces to erase his memory. "Can we forget what we've done?" Philip thought, his black velvet doublet a shroud for his guilt, his journal now closed, its pages heavy with unwritten regrets. The memory of Carlos's scratched pleas, his refusal to eat, and his whispered conversations with phantoms haunted the king, as did the accusations of poison that echoed from France to Vienna. Elizabeth de Valois, her face pale with sorrow, wandered the chapel, her prayers a lament for the prince she had failed to save. He was our hope, now lost, she thought, her heart a tapestry of grief woven with the threads of her own powerlessness. The courtiers, their ochre doublets muted in the autumn light, gathered in hushed groups, their loyalty to Philip tested by the specter of a prince they had pitied. Was he murdered, or did he simply fade? They murmured, their eyes avoiding the empty spaces where Carlos's portraits once hung. The rebellion that had sparked his arrest, born of his love for Elizabeth and dreams of the Netherlands, now seemed a distant dream, its failure a wound that festered in the court's heart. The Escorial's grandeur, built to glorify God and King, felt hollow, its halls echoing with the silence of a dynasty scarred by loss. The protests from foreign courts, once loud, grew quieter, but the whispers of foul play lingered, a stain on Philip's reign that no decree could wash away. The gardens outside lay barren, their crimson roses withered under the autumn chill, a mirror to the court's muted mourning. The monks' chants, once a comfort, sounded like a dirge for a prince whose life had been extinguished in mystery. Have we betrayed our future? The courtiers wondered, their thoughts turning to the empire's next heir, still unborn, and the legacy of a king who had chosen duty over love. The Escorial stood silent, its walls, guarding the secrets of Carlos's final days, the single candle that burned at his end, the accusations that followed. Philip, his gaze fixed on the Sierra's peaks, felt the weight of a crown that now seemed heavier than ever. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light a distant echo of a prince lost to history's shadows. Carlos's death had left the court mourning in silence, haunted by the ghost of an heir whose frailty and rebellion had marked him for tragedy. The palace, a monument to power, now bore the scars of regret. Did Philip's silence honor his son's memory, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a legacy of sorrow from a court's unspoken grief? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial waited, its halls heavy with the weight of a disgraced prince.
The Escorial's stone walls, bathed in the fading light of autumn 1568, stood as silent sentinels while tales of Don Carlos's tragic end began to weave their way beyond the palace, spiraling into legend. In the centuries that followed, the prince's story was immortalized in Friedrich Schiller's play and Giuseppe Verdi's opera, Don Carlos in the 19th century. A well-known historical fact that transformed a troubled heir into a romantic figure of rebellion and doomed love. The air in Spain's villages and Europe's courts carried the scent of wood smoke and old parchment as storytellers and poets spun Carlos's life into a tapestry of myth, his frail form and fiery spirit reshaped by the hands of time. The Escorial, once a prison for the prince's broken dreams, now echoed with the whispers of a legacy that refused to fade. In the taverns of Castile, old women and travelers told darker tales, an obscure detail rarely recorded, folk stories that blamed Carlos's death on a cursed royal bloodline, a divine punishment for the Habsburgs' ambition, rooted in the frail prince born in Valladolid. The blood of Maria Manuela carried doom, they whispered, their voices low as they spoke of a prince whose scratched pleas and imagined conversations with phantoms marked him as cursed. These tales, passed by firelight, painted Carlos as a martyr, his rebellion against Philip II and his love for Elizabeth de Valois a tragic stand against fate. Was he cursed, or did we curse him? The villagers wondered, their eyes darting to the shadows, as if the prince's ghost lingered in the Sierra's winds. The myths grew, blending truth with fiction, each story a thread in a narrative that outgrew the Escorial's somber halls. The court, still reeling from Carlos's death, felt the weight of these emerging legends. Philip II, his black velvet doublet a constant shroud, sat in his private chamber, his journal now a relic of a father's regret. Will they remember him as I could not, he thought, the accusations of poison and murder from France and Vienna haunting his reign. Elizabeth de Valois, her health fading, walked the palace gardens, their crimson roses now mere memories under winter's approach, her heart heavy with the prince's loss. He lives in their stories, but at what cost, she thought, her gentle spirit burdened by the myths that twisted her stepson's pain into romance. The courtiers, their ochre doublets dim in the autumn light, spoke cautiously, aware that the tales spreading beyond the palace walls were reshaping Carlos into a figure they scarcely recognized. The monks' chants drifted from the Escorial's monastery, a solemn counterpoint to the growing myths that carried Carlos's name across Europe. From Spain to Italy, his story became a cautionary tale of power and betrayal, his rebellion and confinement a drama that captivated hearts. The removal of his portraits, ordered by Philip, could not erase the prince's presence. Instead, it fueled the legends, each tale a spark that lit the imagination of poets and playwrights. Have we lost him to myth? The court wondered, their whispers a lament for a truth buried in the Escorial's shadows. The palace, built to glorify God and King, now cradled a legacy that transcended its walls, turning a prince's tragedy into a story for the ages. The stars above the Escorial glimmered faintly, their light a distant echo of a prince whose life had become legend. Carlos's story, born of his frailty, rebellion, and mysterious death, twisted history into myth, leaving a legacy that haunted Europe's conscience. The court stood silent, its halls heavy with the weight of a tale that refused to die. Did the myths honor Carlos's truth, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a legend from a prince's pain? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial waited, its walls guarding the secrets of a life reborn in song and story. Centuries after the Escorial's stone walls bore witness to Don Carlos's tragic end, the enigma of his fate lingered like a shadow across time, haunting the halls of history and the hearts of those who pondered it. The enduring fascination with the prince's story, reflected in historical scholarship and cultural works like Schiller's play and Verdi's opera, a well-known historical fact, kept his name alive, a symbol of a broken air caught in the clash of power and pity. The air of modern Madrid, where archives preserved fragments of the past, carried the faint scent of old parchment, a reminder of the Escorial's somber legacy. The palace, once a prison for Carlos's frail dreams, now stood as a monument to a mystery that refused to be solved, its crimson tapestries and gilded crosses faded echoes of a dynasty's sorrow. In a quiet archive, a single letter fragment from Carlos, an obscure detail preserved in a dusty Madrid vault, lay as a relic of his torment, a scrawled plea to Elizabeth de Valois, its ink faded but its words raw with longing. Did you ever love me? It read, a testament to the prince born frail in Valladolid, whose rebellion and confinement had shaped his tragic arc. Historians pored over such fragments, seeking truth amid the myths that painted Carlos as both martyr and madman. Was he a threat or a victim? They wondered, their pens tracing the outlines of a story blurred by time. The court's whispers, the accusations of poison, the removal of his portraits, all lingered in the collective memory, each detail a thread in a tapestry of intrigue that stretched from the Escorial to Europe's farthest courts. Philip II's shadow loomed large, his black velvet doublet a distant memory, yet his decree and doubts still fueled debate. Elizabeth de Valois,
whose gentle heart had wept for Carlos, was a ghost in the story, her love a spark that myths had fanned into flame. The courtiers' divided loyalties, their ochre doublets dim in the Escorial's halls, had faded, but their questions echoed in modern minds. Did we judge him too harshly? Scholars asked, their thoughts turning to the prince's scratched pleas, his caged finch, his refusal to eat. The gardens of the Escorial, once barren with frost, now bloomed anew, their crimson roses a silent tribute to a prince whose life had been extinguished too soon. The monk's chants, a constant in the palace's history, has seemed to carry a prayer for clarity, a plea to unravel the mystery of Carlos's end. The stars above the Escorial glimmered with a timeless light, their glow a challenge to those who sought to understand the balance of power and pity. The prince's story, born of frailty, rebellion, and a suspicious death, remained an enigma, its truth obscured by the myths that had grown in its wake. The palace stood silent, its walls guarding secrets that time could not fully reveal. Did the truth of Carlos's fate matter, or was history the crueler judge, weaving a mystery from a prince's pain and a king's regret? The shadows deepened, and the Escorial endured, its legacy a reminder of a tragedy that still stirred the heart.
As the night falls over the Escorial, dear listener, let the stars guide your thoughts to a gentler place, where the pain of Don Carlos fades like a distant dream. His frail form, his scratched pleas, his lost love, they rest now, cradled by time's tender embrace. Picture the crimson roses blooming once more, their petals a soft promise of peace for a prince who suffered. The Escorial's walls, heavy with secrets, stand as a testament to lessons learned, urging us to seek truth over power, compassion over judgment. Let the monks' chants soothe your heart, their melody a lullaby for a soul no longer bound by betrayal. The accusations, the myths, the shadows, they dissolve in the quiet of this moment, leaving only hope for a world kinder than the one Carlos knew. Rest now, let the past sorrow slip away, and dream of a dawn where pity prevails. The tale fades. Let the shadows lull you to sleep,